Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. It's Saturday night. We're a little bit early, but that's okay. I'm told the audio is good, the video is good. D-Live chat's rolling. There's already 10 people in the unauthorized chat, and the super chats are live. So tonight I'm going to address something that I popped up on the blog just a bit ago. It's from a discussion that took place at AC's site. And I think it's useful because it highlights one of the fundamental divisions among people of generally good faith, people who are generally on the right side. And it's something that I'm particularly drawn to because my best friend is somebody who is always inclined to be the skeptic when it comes to identifying evil in others. You know, he's kind of hesitant to do that. Crypto Degen sends the first super chat. Thank you. I'm not sure what that means, but I appreciate it. And so without further ado, let me read what this particular individual had to say. And this is, pretty typical of the Carl Denninger position. The pretty common conservative position. And I hesitate to say it's due to a desire to minimize evil. But I think, I see it's a salute. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Crypto DJ. I hesitate to say that it's out of a desire to minimize evil or to cover for evil. I think it actually has to do more with just a desire to not accept that the world is evil as it appears to be. But I could be wrong. Anyhow, here's what this was within the context of a larger discussion over Disney and its repeated decisions to produce stuff that destroys its IP, destroys its profits, lowers its revenues, lowers its market cap, hurts its stock price, again and again and again and again, against common sense. The Synonymous says, of course it's deliberate sabotage. Cabal has always hated Disney. They need his legacy completely removed from the minds of Americans. Vox Day believes this somehow renders materialism and money motivation is irrelevant, and pulls spiritual wickedness out of his butt as a reason to understand all of this. Yep, money doesn't motivate Cabal at all, just spiritual wickedness, which he can neither define nor explain. An astounding expert at missing the obvious and fabricating ghost stories to explain the motion of the world, he doesn't seem to understand the value of cultural legacies and values, and can't in any way conceive that greed is driving all of this. It's the greed of control. Cabal isn't after a few cheap ticket or lunchbox sales. They want everything we have. And that begins with completely lobotomizing us and removing us from our cultural legacy so that we can become compliant little podlings who own nothing and are happy. VD can't see the obvious greed, the greed to control the entire world and wipe out any potential opposition. He can't see that Cabal is interested in taking everything you have and making sure that no remaining humans are able to resist or even survive on their own. Wiping out the legacy of people like Walt Disney is part of our ongoing cultural lobotomization, a move of harsh implications. And yet conservatives gleefully cheer on the destruction of our legacy, and guys like VD do their best to obscure the reality of what's going on by insisting that it's not unimaginably ferocious greed, but instead best explained by old ghost stories. Now, I'll provide a more substantive, detailed response to that here tonight, but let me read you what the responses were from me and some others. Uh, it was interesting to see that literally nobody bought it. None of the other commentators agreed with this guy at all. So the first one says, "Tell me you are atheist without saying you are atheist." Um, that's really all the response it required, rhetoric for rhetoric. But the next one says, "You don't understand Vox," which is certainly true. My response that I posted there, and like I said, we'll get more into it because I think there's some interesting things to look at with regards to that original comment. But it says, first, it's the old ghost stories that define greed as evil, and the love of money being the root of evil. So you're trying to set up a false dichotomy here. Without those old ghost stories, you have no rational basis for condemning either greed or control. Second, it is no problem to define and explain spiritual wickedness. It is the causal driving force between the material wickedness, which is conscious opposition to God, Jesus Christ, and nature. What you call cabal is merely the material opposition that serves the interests and commands of its supra-material masters. Third, the Disney legacy was destroyed when the infiltration was completed. Nothing can save Disney now. There is no point to supporting Disney's assaults on Christian European culture. Fourth, money motivation is non-existent to those who can create it ex nihilo. Money doesn't really exist today, as it's nothing more than promises made by faithless individuals and institutions. So that was my initial response. Obviously, you can see that there are some subtext. I was, rather than attempting to explain in detail, which nobody's going to read in a comment, I just wanted to point people to thinking in the right directions. Far Sensitive, who generally is a critic of mine, especially when it comes to China, but in this case we happen to agree. He says they don't need money, they print money, and they steal more money than you could imagine. It's about power, evil, and destruction. He's absolutely right. No question. And then another response says, "Get out of here with your shallow atheism. Greed is the base motivator for humans, as also is lust, ambition, power, revenge. But the supernatural world influences humans, and it plays the long game. Throughout time, mankind has pursued its short-term carnal desires. But there are evil spiritual forces guiding and shaping these behaviors and energies so as to set in play events that will cause the greatest amount of destruction to mankind, physically and spiritually. Destroy beauty, destroy hope, destroy how people connect to God. Increase alienation, increase isolation, break bonds of family, community, even the sense of self, and a greater harvest of those who will be damned and have their potential denied is possible. It's much bigger than you think it is, and it's been going on for millennia. They know they will lose, and they want to take out as many of us as they can." And then the last comment says, "If you're a shill, LOL, nice try. If you're not a shill, you need to engage in deeper thinking. Greed is only a minuscule variable in what's actually happening in the world right now. Jesus Christ is Lord. Start with the Bible." And I thought those were all excellent responses, from the shortest, most rhetorical ones to the more detailed ones that were addressing the points that the guy was raising. Now, Cactus Eater Bear says, "Tell me you wear a fedora." Caleb G sends the second super chat. Thank you. He says, "Just paying my retard away." I had no idea that was going to become a thing. But Caleb, ego te absolvo, the retard is gone. The Spider Bip says Scott Adams struggles with the concept too. Yeah, he absolutely does. And so, to a certain extent, do Mike Cernovich and increasingly less and less Stefan Molyneux. And the reason is very simple. If you don't accept the existence of the spiritual world, if you don't accept the reality that there is more going on than what you can explain in purely materialistic terms, if you limit yourself to what science accepts today, then you have no possibility of grasping the fullness of what's taking place. Now, I'm not saying that I grasp the fullness. I'm not saying anybody grasps the fullness. But in order to have any reasonable idea of what is taking place or why things have happened in the past, you need to at least be open to the possibility of spiritual influence. Hooten, you misunderstood. He says, it was very interesting AC went after Vox. Seems to me AC is shilling. No, that wasn't AC. That was just an anonymous comment. AC is anonymous conservative. He has a site. And he is probably the leading commentator online discussing the surveillance society in the United States. You know, he's pretty comprehensively and conclusively documented that the United States has a operation of comparable size and interference to the East German Stasi. And so, and there's a lot of stuff there. You know, how much of it is true, I have no idea, but he makes he's documented it pretty thoroughly, and I've certainly encountered things here and there that tend to support his thesis. But he's not the guy that was the original comment. That was just, all of the commenters, if they don't attach their name to it, it shows up as anonymous. So that was just a random anonymous commentator. And in fact, since you bring it up, let me point this out. I don't believe that it was a real comment. No, all you have to do is read the thing. It says anonymous. It doesn't say AC. So, but what's interesting here, let's go over this now, okay? So, of course it's deliberate sabotage. Okay, we agree on that. We agree on that. Cabal has always hated Disney. I have no idea about that. We know that the Jews hated Disney back in the day, and that Disney hated the Jews. Who fits where? Don't know. They need his legacy completely removed from the minds of Americans. Why? No, they don't. They're concerned with Jesus Christ, not Walt Disney. Think about this. I mean, let's just be realistic about this for a second. If they wanted to completely destroy the legacy of Disney, wouldn't they have changed the name of the company? Wouldn't it make more sense if you want to destroy the legacy of Walt Disney? Why would you keep the name? They could have changed the name 30 years ago. I mean, as Bargain Bear says, forget most people under 20, Most people under 40 don't even know that Walt Disney was a person. You know, and so that's the first indication that this this guy's analysis is off. If it is the owners of the current owners of Disney's objective to destroy the legacy of Walt Disney, then they should have, at the very least, changed the name of the company, changed the names of the park, erased Disney from the organization. It's not like we haven't seen that done before, right? So then Voxday believes this somehow renders the fact that they're trying to destroy Disney renders materialism and money motivation to be irrelevant. No, I think that it's obviously wrong. They're not completely changing the Snow White story, and they're not replacing the seven dwarves with the seven diversities and replacing Snow White with a Mexican tortilla chick because they want to make more money. They're not going to make more money. They're going to lose a lot of money. So I think that what renders materialism and money motivation not irrelevant, but obviously not applicable, is the fact that they keep doing the same sort of thing that keeps losing money and keeps driving people away. It can't be a money motivation. ETL sends a super chat. Thank you. He says, first live I've caught in forever. Apologies for my tardiness. You are forgiven. Reproba says, they like to wear things as a skin suit too, though, aka Ford Foundation. Exactly. And if they like to wear things as a skin suit, then obviously they're not trying to destroy the legacy. Right? There's no way. Venomous says they don't want to build, they want to invert. Precisely. They're attempting to wear things as a skin suit. They're attempting to transform and invert the legacy, not destroy it altogether. What would be the point? He pulls spiritual wickedness out of his butt as a reason to understand all this. No, it's not. I didn't invent the concept of spiritual wickedness. I am not anywhere nearly so arrogant as to imagine for a second that that's a concept that I have originated in any way, shape, or form. It's inherent to Christianity. Somebody pointed out earlier in the chat that the materialism explanation is a way for people to hang on to their atheism and avoid having to deal with the existence of evil. That's, I think, often true. What I find harder to understand is that you see good people, Christians and so forth, who also make that mistake. And I don't fully understand that particular desire. The constant desire to minimize, the constant, the people that believe that, all of history is an accident. History exists the way that it does because it just happened to, and nobody ever intended anything ever. It's just it's almost like this is a misleading term, but it's almost like an economic theory of history, which is that all history is just the self-interested interactions of all of the players. It's like a history as market, but that's obviously incorrect. We have a super chat here from Telecaster Bear Gagan. Excited to present Booster Patrol at the National Bear Fest. Thanks to Cactus Eater Bear on vocals. Yeah, that's great. I'm delighted to hear that's taking place, and I hope it goes well. So then he says, yep, money doesn't motivate Cabal at all, just spiritual wickedness, which he can neither explain nor define. Well, obviously, I can and I do explain it. And the reason that I say specifically spiritual wickedness is that I am separating that and distinguishing it from mere material wickedness, which we can witness, which we engage in, hopefully not too much wickedness ourselves. Let me back up a second and explain. I use the term wickedness differently from evil because evil is when we don't do the will of God. Evil is when we sin. But there is a fundamental difference between when we sin because we put ourselves, because we want to do it. When we give in to temptation. There's a difference between that and wickedness, which is you are intentionally and actively choosing something, not because you want to do it, but because it is sinful. It's conscious and purposeful evil for the sake of evil. That's what wickedness is, in the context that I'm using it. I'm not. I'm just. And I'm not attempting to redefine the terms or expect anybody else to use them. It's just I find it useful to distinguish between evil as weakness, sin as weakness, and sin as active, conscious opposition to God. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that one is necessarily better in terms of either way you fall short of the glory of God and are guilty, but it has profound and very different implications for those who are opposing it. When somebody means well, wants to do what is right, but gives into temptation, then you can talk to them and help them. You cannot do that when someone is actively at war with God. They're two different, two fundamentally different mindsets. And that's why I think it's so important to distinguish between the two of them. And so there's hope for the people who engage in sin. Someone who sins is capable of repentance. Someone who is wicked has actively set themselves at war with God. They do not repent. They will not repent. And it's a totally different situation. Now, the difference between spiritual wickedness and material wickedness is human wickedness. It's the pride stuff. Pride is wicked in a way that some gay guy in the closet is not. Because it's the difference between doing what you know to be wrong because you are weak and declaring that what God claims to be wrong is actually good. It's the inversion. And that's why I always say that inversion is the stink of sulfur. If you're not sure if something's good or not, look and see if there's any inversion involved. In fact, I find it really interesting that even I read Yukio Mishima's Confessions of a Mask recently. And the mask that he's wearing is basically he's a gay guy who doesn't really realize he's gay, but he wears this mask of normalcy, and um, and it's from a Christian perspective. And Mishima, he's Japanese. He's not. He was thoroughly pagan, but he was conscious of Christianity because the girl in the book is actually a Christian, which is interesting. But the mask that he wears gradually transforms him from simply being evil to actually starting to become wicked. And what I found interesting about it is that he was of an age where where homosexuality was still referred to as inversion. Like he talks specifically about and refers to himself as the invert. And language is often a clue to deeper truths, which of course is why the perversion of language is one of the fundamental tools in the toolbox of the wicked. Telecaster Bear says, does it come down to the intention to spread evil to others? I don't think it necessarily comes down to that, but I do think that is one common theme. That's one common that's typically where you'll see the transformation from evil to wickedness. It comes to the proselytization to others. So, let's see. Umberkid says, how can you see the evils being committed against children and deny spiritual evil? Well, that's one of the reasons why people are so in denial about child sex trafficking and child sex abuse. Because, even though they've been indoctrinated to accept homosexuality and self-mutilation and all sort, fornication, immorality, etc., etc., even though they've been conditioned child sex trafficking, it's just, you can't. And so that's why it's so difficult to grasp these things. And so and that's why I think that people, even good people, tend to want to deny it, because if they do accept it, then they have to accept the reality of spiritual evil, the evil of the supernatural world. Now, I personally think that the supernatural evil is obvious. I don't know how you can look at the way that societies degrade and become degenerate and ultimately collapse, and see how the same things happen over and over and over again. How is it possible for people 100 years ago to predict the rise of feminism, to predict the rise of homosexuality, to even predict something as insane, something seemingly as impossible as a return to human sacrifice? How could you predict that without a knowledge of history and a theory of supernatural evil? Right? And the reason that people did, the reason that Christian men did, is because they understood the nature of evil. They understood that there are immortal, supernatural forces that are acting on humanity and finding willing human partners who are then attempting to bring about these things again. It's not just a desire to keep sinning and a refusal to repent. That's where wickedness starts. But at the higher, I mean, think about this, and this is, again, just a theory, but what is it that George Soros is attempting to accomplish at his age? He's going to be dead within the next probably 6 months, almost certainly within the next 2 years. What is he striving to do? What is he attempting to do? Does he really care about what the shape of the open society is? No. He's trying to win immortality from his masters. I can't prove it, but that's the only serious logical conclusion. Because what else is there in it for them? They know about the reality of the spiritual world. They know that Jesus is going to win. They know what their ultimate destiny is. But they want to put it off as long as possible. Coffee Grounds Bear says, the demons always want a new body to infest. It's the reason why abused children tend to become the predator. The demon passes on from there. That is one theory. John says he wants to destroy the West, the European people, and wipe Christ off the face of the earth. Sure, we know that. But look how old he is. That's not really a great reason to get up in the morning when you're 90 years old. I mean, how much more, if you think about the declining marginal utility of his actions, that's not a sufficient motivation at his age. There's more to it than that. Dan in Georgia points out that David Rockefeller had 7 or more heart transplants. They're all desperately trying to cling on. And they're all desperately trying to accomplish something. Something that's going to get them their reward now. These are not people, clearly these are not people who are, Veritas says, he just really cares about district attorney races in California. Yeah, I mean, that demonstrates how absurd the materialist argument is. Yeah. Well, he's got nothing better to do. I mean, it's clear he's following orders. It's clear he's being told what to do, and he's doing it in the hopes of being permitted a parasitic form of pseudo-immortality. Once you open your eyes to the reality of the spiritual world, suddenly it provides you with a much wider range of possibility, and allows you to comprehend seemingly inexplicable, seemingly stupid, seemingly implausible explanations for various things. I mean, someone like let me give you an example. The materialist model suffices to explain someone like Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner, it's not difficult to understand that he was a guy who was very hedonistic and used his money to surround himself with young, beautiful, blonde women right up until the day he died. I'm content to accept the materialist explanation, somebody like him, right? But that doesn't explain, and that would even explain somebody like Bill Clinton. I could accept it with Bill Clinton. I can't accept it with people like Hillary Clinton. I can't accept it with people like George Soros. Even Alex Soros, has announced that he's 100 times, interestingly enough, he's 100 times worse than his father. Right? If they understand Jesus is more powerful, why not go with him? Because they've rejected him. And they have presumably been lied to by, remember, they've been told, a lot of them have been told, this is barring like a whole separate society thing, which is possible, but they've been told that the whole thing about, God and Jesus is a lie. Science, rationalism, right? And then they get introduced to esotericism. Well, there's actually a bit more to it than that, but this is how it goes. This is the truth. So they, and then once they get to the point where they understand that the whole thing is real, I think it's much too late. They believe that Satan wants to free the human race from the evil authoritarian God the Father and his evil overseer Jesus. And again, it's all inverted. And that's why you can spot what's wicked. You see the inversion. So let's go back to this thing here. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, he can't in any way conceive that greed is driving all of this. It's the greed of control. Okay, so now we're getting into a little bit of dishonesty here, right? He's talking about greed and money, and then suddenly it's the greed of control. Well, yeah, I believe that they're after control, no question. But they're not after control, and it's not greed. So he's attempting to, and now personally, I'm not going to bother with it anymore, because personally, I don't think that this is a real person. In the sense that I don't believe it's an actual argument being honestly made by a materialist. I strongly suspect that this is some sort of paid, it's either some sort of paid troll, possibly written with an AI assist. It's got that sort of incoherence that we've learned to recognize from AI. It's all about finishing the thing. Yep. Mrs. Texas spotted it too. She says, greed is sin, control is another thing. AI, that's exactly what I think. Once I got down to that point, I thought, Vox can't see the obvious greed, the greed to control the entire world and wipe out any potential opposition. Okay, there's a big difference between greed, wanting to own everything, and wanting to wipe things out, right? Dan says, one of AC's surveillance feds? Oh, probably, and probably not one of the smarter ones. One thing that we know is that AI is being used very heavily by the trolls, both amateur and professional. And it's pretty easy to spot if you take the trouble to fisk it, because you just run into these incoherencies that are not, but they're not there consistently. Get Along Home says, might just be retarded. so hard to tell the difference between AI and retard sometimes. I disagree. I think it's very easy to see the difference between them. Because remember, AI is just a fancy way of finishing things. You know, it completes the sentence on the basis of what came before. And so there's a superficial sense to it that you detect when you look more closely at it. The retard tends to be more all over the place. You know, AI tends to like there's a lot of circular logic, which you see here, which you also see in that particular comment. But it's AI tends to be like, you go along, and then all of a sudden, wait, what? You know, they just suddenly juke a bit in a way that normal humans don't do. When humans don't make sense, they tend to not make sense in a more comprehensive manner. I mean, think about it. How can the only way that a human can go off base like that, like make sense, and then suddenly not make sense, is if they're being intentionally dishonest. And there's just, and when they do that, it tends to be a little slicker. They tend to engage in something called amphiboly. It's a sophistic technique where you substitute a word that means something else. So, for example, in this case, if you were using a sophistic technique, what you would do is you wouldn't try to completely redefine greed. You wouldn't say, they have agreed for control. I mean, that's one step above saying, it's all agreed for blue. What? But in this case, what they were trying to do is they're trying to me, it reads like the sections were entered differently. Ms. Texas says, exactly, intentional dishonesty. That's why they're busy changing the meanings of words. Precisely. Whenever you see, I mean, Aristotle pointed this out. If you haven't read Rhetoric, I absolutely recommend that you do so. It's a difficult read. All Aristotle is difficult reading, but it's worth it. If you read it slowly and you make yourself think about what he's actually saying, it's very, very worthwhile. But it is difficult. I grant you that. And so, but what's fascinating is that you really learn the techniques. You not only learn what the techniques are, but you learn how to successfully identify them. It doesn't matter whether it's human, AI, or whatever. For example, if you just type in amphiboly into the blog, there's four posts on it. It's the first one that I'm talking about here, and this was back when I was addressing Scalzi's nonsense on a regular level. And what was interesting here, Scalzi had said, it's interesting how many people clearly think they can argue well, who in fact can't argue their way out of a paper bag. Okay, a little rhetorical bit there. I said, I found that to be amusing, coming as it does from an individual who makes habitual use of the sophistical tactic that Aristotle described as ambiguity, and when called on it, once tried to justify its use because a degree in the philosophy from the University of Chicago. That was actually pretty funny. Anyhow, it says, here's the quote that I wanted to read from Rhetoric. Those ways of producing the false appearance of an argument which depend upon language are 6 in number. They are ambiguity, amphiboly, combination, division of words, accent, and form of expression. Of this we may assure ourselves both by induction and by syllogistic proof based on this, and it may be on other assumptions as well, that this is the number of ways in which we might fail to mean the same thing by the same names or expressions. So what Aristotle is saying is there's 6 different ways to be dishonest through word magic. Arguments such as the following depend upon ambiguity. Those who learn who know, for it is those who know their letters who learn the letters dictated to them. For to learn is ambiguous. It signifies both to understand by the use of knowledge and also to acquire knowledge, 2 different things. Again, evils are good, for what needs to be is good, and evils must needs be. For what needs to be has a double meaning. It means what is inevitable, as is often the case of evils, too, for evil of some kind of it is inevitable, while on the other hand, we say of good things as well that they need to be. So what he's distinguishing there is inevitable for something that should be. Moreover, the same man is both seated and standing, and he is both sick and in health. For it is he who stood up who is standing, and he who is recovering who is in health, but it is the seated man who stood up and the sick man who is recovering. For the sick man does so-and-so, or has so-and-so done to him, is not single in meaning. Sometimes it means the man who is sick, or is seated now. Sometimes it means the man who was sick formerly. Of course, the man who is recovering was the sick man who was really sick at the time, but the man who is in health is not sick at the same time. He is the sick man in the sense not that he is sick now, but that he was sick formerly. Now you can see why I say that he is difficult to read. It's kind of funny. Aristotle, Aristotle is extremely intelligent because one of the best ways to identify somebody who's intelligent, highly intelligent, is that their explanations are more confusing than the statements that they're trying to explain. Q1882 says brain hurts. Yeah, there's much. In fact, I'm not usually a popularizer. I'm generally in the next tier up from popularizers. I don't have the ability to communicate things in simple enough terms generally, but I do find it interesting because in the case of Aristotle, I can serve as a popularizer because I can look at what he's saying and understand what he's saying, but then explain his explanation in more simple terms. All he was saying there is that saying the sick man can refer to somebody who is sick now or somebody who was previously sick. And he's trying to explain the example of ambiguity. Now, what this particular commenter was doing was not even ambiguity. He just did the basic atheistic bait and switch. First he was talking about greed for money motivation, and then suddenly it switched to greed for control. And then he switched it again to saying, they want to convert everybody to serfs and rule over them. He actually tried to combine 3 distinct, and if you want to throw the genocide aspect in there, he tried to combine 4 different things all under greed in an attempt to say that I didn't understand. interesting approach. Um, Renee K said, it took me 8 months to read Rhetoric, and I need to reread it. Yeah, it's one of those books where you can't just read it once. I mean, you really need to read it several times if you're going to have any hope of understanding it. And often, I think for a lot of people, it is helpful to just break down the section, like literally chart out some of the syllogisms, some of the explanations. The complex sentences used can be very confusing, but again, it's worth the effort to understand it, because it's so easy to pick out falsehoods when you know that there's 6 different specific word games. You see the word game and then you go, okay, so is this ambiguity? Is this amphiboly? What is it? That's why I always criticize people. There was a time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when everybody on the blog and then eventually on social media was, I don't know if they picked it up from me or where they got it from, but I would often tell people that were attempting to criticize me, I would say, well, look, that's a logical fallacy. But I would tell them which logical fallacy it was. That's the excluded middle. That's ad hom, whatever. That's argumentum ad absurdum. And it was kind of funny because people started going, that's a logical fallacy, without explaining it. Like, it got kind of painful because, it got to the point where occasionally I would find myself saying, no, that's not a logical fallacy. No, I'm not going to take you out right now. We have a guest. It's the old man. Are you up late? Yeah, it's okay. So anyhow, Get Along Home says, awfully nice of you to do that. Yeah, I don't think it was really perceived that way, generally speaking. But anyhow, to get back to the subject, if you're honest with yourself, when you're doing what is wrong. When you're doing something evil. And it's not, turn off. Go lay down. Yeah, there you go. I've got 2 dogs in the office with me now. The princess is she's just snoozing there. Anyhow, Aaron Terp says, bro has a guard dog. Dude, you have no idea. We have way more than a guard dog. But anyhow, it's not that hard to extrapolate from our own evil desires to understand what it would be like, where we would be if we were to pursue that. If we were to insist that our wrongdoing was actually good. And it's so we can get to the concept of material wickedness rationally. We can get there in terms of understanding. You can't really get to spiritual wickedness that way, because that's we're dealing with different entities. We're dealing with different time frames. There you have to either have come to face with it yourself, so that you can't deny it any longer. And that's there's a certain gravity that you see in the eyes and you hear in the words of people who have confronted it, who've been forced to face it. Think about the way that when Jim Caviezel of the Sound of Freedom movie, when he's talking about some of the stuff that they learned about in the making of the movie, when you see the expression and you hear the way that Mel Gibson talks about some of this kind of stuff. Mark Wahlberg apparently has started speaking out on the issue as well. I've noticed it both among, so it's a variant of what you see when you're talking to cops or you're talking to soldiers or sometimes people in the medical community about the things that they've had to deal with. They're just you can just like see a shield in their eyes just kind of slam down, mostly because they're trying to protect the person that they're talking to from the full extent of their experiences. And it's something that you occasionally see when you're talking to Christians, when you're talking to pastors, priests. That's whenever you see that, I think that you have a pretty good indicator that this is somebody who knows what they're talking about. And but it's also something, like I said, that can be deduced from simply the application of logic to the rhythms of history. Because why under any rationalist or materialistic or even philosophical model, why would humans return repeatedly to the idea of blood offerings to non-human beings to achieve benefits to themselves? If it doesn't work, why does humanity return to it again and again and again and again? There was this idea back in the 50s, white bread, innocent Christian America that, those things were outdated, and now that we have science and all this sort of thing. Well, guess what? We've had science for a long time. And yet, some of the people who have been most significant in science, whether it's Isaac Newton, whether it's John Parsons, whether it's Nikola Tesla, I think it's interesting that they all end up returning eventually to the supernatural. Somebody's decided he wanted to be on camera after all. So anyhow, the more that we see of it, the more that we learn of it, the more we understand that it's real. And so, I'm not saying that there's, now we're getting to the point where the scientists are starting to promote the blood sacrifice. That's when you know that the society has become fully degenerate. So, anyhow, I think the case is, I'm not saying I've made the case, I haven't, but I do think that the case is conclusive. And so I think that when we have friends, when we have acquaintances that attempt to uphold the materialist case, I think it's important to point out to them the incoherencies and inconsistencies of that, because ultimately, whether people intend it or not, that is a form of defending and justifying evil, and it's best not to accept that. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.